now on Overnights,
I believe in reason and common sense.
Leith Van Onselen from Macro Business with a treasury of common sense.
Common sense never goes out of style.
Hello, Leith. How are you this morning?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Phil. How about yourself?
I'm okay. There's a few things we need to discuss. Let's get into it. What's got your interest this week?
Yeah, it's actually a pretty interesting story around Sydney's water supply. So Sydney's population, it's increased by about 1.5 million people, or, roughly 40% since the Sydney Olympics, or since the turn of the century, I should say. But, if people want to visualise that, it's always good if you're old enough to remember the Sydney Olympics, because that was obviously in 2000.
Yeah.
So most people, if you say the year 2000, they think, I can't remember that was. But when you say the Sydney Olympics, most people go, oh, yeah, I remember where I was at Sydney Olympics.
Yeah,
you can sort of visualise how Sydney was back then if you lived in Sydney and if you're old enough to remember. So you can sort of kind of remember how life was back then. And it's hard to believe that we're basically 25 years away.
I know. It's crazy because the way you talk about it like it's the 1950s, but 25 years ago still. And what's changed?
Yeah, it's insane. Well, I mean, it's ridiculous. Just a quick tangent. Back when Kathy Freeman won a gold medal at the Sydney Olympics, I was playing basketball. We were in the middle of a basketball game. I was in my early 20s. And I actually remember, we actually stopped the basketball game, went to this little, CRT TV, because this is, the days before plasma TVs, flat screens, all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And we had basically a couple hundred people crowded around this little, not very, very small CRT TV watching Kathy Freeman run a race. We saw her win gold, and then everyone went back, and we literally stopped the game. So, wherever they were, the whole stadium, which had about 10 courts, crowded around this TV, everyone cheered, and then we went back to playing when we finished off our basketball games. It was quite incredible. But anyway, A quick tangent. I'll get back to what we're talking about. So the population's grown by 1.5 million people, 40% since the Sydney Olympics. And Sydney's population is expected to grow by around another 3 million people over the next, sort of 40 to 50 years.
Yeah,
right?
and this city is really crowded at the moment as it is.
Yeah, that's right. So I've often argued that, if you're old enough to remember, do you think Sydney's a better place now than it was in the year 2000? And most people who are old enough and ask that question, they say, no, it's not. And it's pretty easy to see why. I mean, obviously, the cost of housing in Sydney is absolutely insane.
Yep.
You've got more congestion, and unfortunately, when I used to drive up there to visit my cousin, etc., back in the 25 years ago, you could pretty much drive around Sydney without getting smacked with a toll road, right? Unless you crossed the bridge or the tunnel, or you drove near the airport. There used to be a toll road out there. It probably still is. But, nowadays when you drive around Sydney, so when I drive the Gold Coast, etc., sometimes go to Sydney, there are toll roads everywhere, right? So Sydney is now the most tolled city in the world. And I argue that the reason why it's the most tolled city in the world is because obviously you're landlocked, you've added 1.5 million people. So the government has had to add all this road infrastructure to cope with that extra 1.5 million people. And, they've brought in these private companies like Transurban. And now the end result is that people are now driving around Sydney paying these private taxes to toll companies like Transurban, whereas 25 years ago they could drive around Sydney and they weren't charged these private taxes, right?
Yeah.
And then on top of that, you add the fact that 25 years ago most people didn't have to live in a shoebox apartment. Now that anyone who's new to Sydney or coming up or entering adulthood, most people can't afford to buy, but even if you're renting, you're now forced to live in a shoebox apartment, whereas, 25 years ago, that you're more likely to be able to live in a house.
Yeah, of course.
So the standard of living, I'd argue, Sydney has gotten a lot worse over the last 25 years, and it's going to get worse as you grow by another 3 million people. And this is just really the cost of immigration, I've got to say. It's just a numbers game, right? It keeps stuffing more and more people into a limited urban area. You're going to create problems. It's the same in Brisbane. It's the same in Melbourne, etc. Now, getting back to water, Infrastructure Australia, which is Australia's infrastructure body, their statutory agency, they released modelling in 2017, so it's obviously pretty long in the tooth. But they forecast that household water bills adjusted for inflation across Australia will more than quadruple, so go up fourfold over 50 years due to rapid population growth and climate change. And so effectively the household water bills were on average $1,226 a year in 2017, and they forecast that they're going to hit $6,000. This is once you adjust for inflation by 2067. So, and the reason for that is we're going to keep growing the populations across our cities. And because of climate change, etc., they forecast less rainfall. So that means you have to do more desalination, that sort of thing, which is very expensive, very energy intensive. And as a result, we're all going to end up paying more for our water. And this is, I'd argue, is a cost of rapid population growth, right? So, we're already paying through more toll roads, we're paying through poorer housing conditions, more congestion, and now we're going to pay more for water. Now, the Productivity Commission's also released similar sorts of research. Now, with this background in mind, Sydney Water, late last year, proposed to increase Sydney's water bills by 53% over 5 years, which would basically lift average water bills from about $1,220 last year to $1,870 in 5 years' time. And that would mean that you're paying $650 more in 5 years' time, or $130 extra per year. And Sydney Water argued that this extra money that every Sydney water user would pay is necessary to fund infrastructure upgrades, primarily for new growth areas, i.e. to fund more immigration, right? So this is just another cost that everyone's bearing from continually to grow the population forever by importing a whole bunch of people. Bearing in mind that basically 100% of Sydney's population growth comes from immigration, because you lose some residents to other states every year. That balances out births. So pretty much all your population growth comes from overseas. And so they requested this last year. New South Wales' independent pricing regulatory tribunal, it's called IPART, they said, no, that's too much. They instead proposed an increase of 25% over 5 years. That would still add about $61 every year for the next 5 years to your water bill. And Sydney Water's spit the dummy.
Yep.
And they've come back with another counter proposal, and they want to lift water bills by 32%. So initially they said 53%. The regulator said no, 25%. They've come back with a counter offer for 32%, which is basically a third. And if they got their way, they'd increase water bills by $78 per year for the next 5 years. And the reason why Sydney Water said this, they said if they don't get this extra money, they're going to basically have $1.25 billion less to invest in water filtration, etc. And that threatens Sydney's ability to provide safe and clean drinking water, and could end up leading to people having to boil their water.
Yeah,
which is pretty dire when you think about it.
In Australia, that's right.
It's absolutely insane. Sydney, a board meeting by Sydney Water last year said that basically they're facing increasing funding pressures in Sydney's growth areas, like the Sydney's West, etc., which tends to be where most new arrivals go. Yeah. And they said the biggest drivers behind the planned increase is providing water infrastructure to these new areas in Sydney's West primarily. And so anyway, they've also said that if they don't get this increase in water bills, it's also going to threaten the state government's housing targets. So the state government and the federal government have set these pretty ambitious housing targets to provide all this housing to keep up with the high immigration, the high population growth. And they said if we don't get this extra, funding, we don't charge water users a whole lot more money, we're not going to be able to fund new housing as well. And that's going to lead to deeper housing shortages. And the whole thing about this, Phil, is that unfortunately Sydney's limited with rainfall, and so is the whole of Australia, right? We only get a certain amount of rainfall every year, and we've already passed the situation whereby the populations in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, etc., are already greater than what nature can provide through rainfall. So we've already gone through we've already implemented desalination plants down the East Coast. And the problem is these desalination plants are a lot more expensive than traditional rainwater dam supplies. So, for example, in Victoria, now this is obviously just one example, this is one I could find, the cost of the Wonthaggi desalination plant in Victoria is $3.01 per kilolitre. And this compares to dam water, which is about 60 cents per kilolitre. So what this means is if we keep growing our populations like a science experiment, and we've got to keep building all these desalination plants, it means that not only do these desal plants use a hell of a lot of water, a hell of a lot of energy, I should say, to use them, they're also going to push up our average water bills, our average water costs. And that was that was made pretty clear in that Infrastructure Australia study, which I quoted earlier, which said that our water bills, once you adjust for inflation, are going to rise by 4 times what they are currently, or what they were in 2017 in just 50 years.
Wow.
And this is just another case of how the federal government continues to just plough more and more people into Australia's major cities, in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane, without any thought of the consequences of what it means to the residents of these cities. So I've already mentioned Sydney. Now you're the most tolled city in the world, whereas 25 years ago, when the Sydney Olympics were on, when you had a population of 3.8 million, as opposed to 5.3, 5.4 million currently, and projected to go to over 8 million, you can't drive around Sydney now without Transurban fleecing you and pulling money out of your pocket for tolls, right?
Yeah, that's it.
That is a direct reduction in your living standards. If you want to purchase a house or rent a house in Sydney, the chances are it's going to be a high-rise apartment now. Whereas, a generation or so ago, it was a good chance it was a house and it was going to cost you a lot less, or cost you a lot less to rent. And, just general livability has gone down the tubes, in not just Sydney, but in Melbourne, Brisbane, other places, because we just keep funneling more and more people into these cities without any thought about what it means for livability, what it means for cost of living, what it means for housing, what it means for water supplies, et cetera, et cetera. And this is just, the Sydney water issue is just a microcosm of the problems of just this endless growth paradigm.
Yeah.
Sydney, as I've said, Sydney has run out of, basically doesn't get enough rainfall now and doesn't have enough dam water to supply the current population. And if you keep expanding and keep growing that population, it goes to over 8 million people. Well, obviously, you're going to have to keep building. You're going to have to build more and more of these desalination plants, which cost a hell of a lot of money to run. They're going to jack up everyone's water bills. And it is an unnecessary cost that is being borne through this mad rush to grow Sydney to 8 million people, to grow Melbourne to 9 million people, to grow Brisbane to roughly 5 million people. When I bet you most of the residents that actually live in those cities do not want to see their cities grow to those sizes, because
that's right.
it means a direct degradation of their living standards. And again, this is just one more example, one more nail in the coffin of this ridiculous Big Australia policy that's thrust upon us by our politicians.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I'm waiting until this city becomes unsustainable so everybody moves out, so I can afford a studio flat 50 kilometres from the CBD. Yeah,
the only problem with that, Phil, is that Sydney actually does lose tens of thousands of people every year, generally up north to Queensland. But
right.
For the problem with it is the loss of people is absolutely dwarfed by those coming in overseas.
Well, that's the issue, isn't it? Well, I tell you the other thing too, and you mentioned 2025, now 25 years after the year 2000. I'll tell you what's changed about Sydney compared to Melbourne as well. You've still got a nightlife down there in Melbourne.
Yeah, we do, but we also have pretty crappy weather. We've got a terrible state government. So,
Yeah.
I guess you pick your poison. I mean, Melbourne has great weather in summer, and there are some periods where the weather's good. But I tell you what, mate, this time of year, it is miserable down here. It's freezing.
Well, every time I go to Melbourne, I can't believe how many people are out and about and the things there are to do, restaurants, nightlife. Sydney has completely lost all that. So, if you want to get more people in here, they've got nowhere to go to spend their cash.
Yeah, I would just add one last thing, just to your point, though, wanting people to, well, I don't know, you're being sarcastic, obviously, wanting people to leave, but so New South Wales last year, so this obviously isn't Sydney, this is the state, but it's the most recent data we've got. In last calendar years, New South Wales grew by 108,000 people, 107,000 people, so pretty much almost 100% came from net overseas migration. So that's from overseas. Sydney actually lost 28,000 people to other states last year.
Wow.
Right. So, and that effectively offset your new births. So effectively, Sydney's population would be zero if it wasn't for net overseas migration. So, although you are losing people every year interstate, and predominantly that gets down to the cost of housing. The median house price in Sydney is about $1.4 to $1.5 million. That is way more than anywhere else in the country, and just because of that reason alone, it's also the most expensive place to rent.
Yep.
Because of that reason alone, you do lose a lot of younger people. They go to other parts of Australia because they just simply cannot afford to live in Sydney. It's too expensive. But the problem with it is, Phil, while they leave, you get about nearly 3 to 4 times as many people from overseas coming in to replace them. So as a result, your population just continues to surge anyway. And that's why Sydney is projected to grow to 8 million people in the next 40 or 50 years. And the fact of the matter is, if you had zero net overseas migration, Sydney would actually shrink.
Yeah.
So all your population growth, all your issues with water, all your issues with congestion and housing affordability, and that really traces back to excessive net overseas migration.
Okay, well, I'll rethink my idea of moving to the studio apartment, because I'll still have to do that if I want to buy, but I'm not going to be able to afford to have a shower. Where can people find out more information on this? And thanks for bringing attention to it.
Yeah, no worries, Phil. Go to www.macrobusiness.com.au. We've also got a YouTube channel at Leithvo, Leithvo. Those are the two principal places.
The expert